Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, and welcome to our research dissemination event. Just to let you know that this event is being recorded from now. And today we will be discussing the findings and the outcomes of our joint research project, optimizing collaborations and reducing inequalities of early childhood intervention in post-COVID-19 South Africa. And this is a joint venture between the University of Pretoria, namely the Centre for Augmentative and Alternative Communication and the School of Arts, with the University of Roehampton in London. And the project is funded by the British Academy. So before we start, we should just perhaps introduce ourselves. My name is Susanna Castro-Kemp, and I am currently an associate professor at the University College London Institute of Education. Previously, I was at Roehampton University, and that is where this project was based. I have a background in educational psychology and special educational needs, and a particular interest in early childhood intervention. And I am the principal investigator for this project. And now I'll let my colleagues introduce themselves as well. Shakila, would you like to go next?
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Shakila Dada. I'm currently the director at the Centre for Augmentative and Alternative Communication.
Alicia?
Hello, everybody. Alicia Samuels here. I am an associate professor in the Centre for AAC and the coordinator of the master's program in early childhood intervention.
Fatima?
Hi, everyone. I'm Fatima Kassim. I'm a senior lecturer in the School of the Arts at the University of Pretoria, specifically in the Information Design Division.
And Kyle?
Hi there, I'm Carl Roth. I'm a lecturer at the University of Pretoria in the School of the Arts, Information Design.
Thank you. Yes.
Susanna, I see Adele May, the other postdoc, is also on this call. Would it be possible for her to also just introduce herself, please?
Absolutely. Welcome, Adele.
Hi, everybody. My name is Adele. I was very privileged to be the postdoc on this project, and I'm glad to be here to listen to the results and just collaborate again with the team. Wonderful to be here.
Thank you very much. It's really lovely to have the team all together, albeit virtually. And okay, so let's move on to the project itself. So why did we come up with this project? In 2021, the British Academy launched a call, which was called Humanities and Social Sciences, Tackling Global Challenges. And this was to fund projects with a 2-year duration that bring original interdisciplinary research ideas from the humanities and social sciences to enhance our understanding of the challenges and opportunities that people, cultures, and economies face, particularly in the global South. So a very broad area of research and funding, highly focused on collaboration between disciplines to tackle an issue that is seen as a challenge in the global South context. And so we were awarded this funding to deliver a 2-part interdisciplinary research project involving early childhood science and the arts together. And we really did not want this to be an unequal partnership. We wanted it to be a true example of what being interdisciplinary can produce for the benefit of society. So the project had 2 parts. One that was focused on understanding issues around collaboration in early childhood education and early childhood intervention in South Africa. And then a second part that focused on producing digital resources that could help tackle the lack of cross-disciplinary collaboration in provision for young children in South Africa as well. But before we start explaining what the 2 parts consisted of, I think it's important to provide a little bit of background on this issue of collaboration and why we think it's so important to focus on it. The literature on early childhood intervention and early childhood education worldwide is consensual on the fact that collaboration between practitioners of different fields can lead to better outcomes for children and families, because it allows for a more holistic understanding of the child's needs, and obviously a more coordinated response to meet those needs. But when we say holistic, what are we referring to? We're referring to the most contemporary understandings in the scientific community about how development works and evolves, and also about disability. And the most contemporary approach to development, which has been very consensual, is this idea that we don't develop in isolation. We are surrounded by systems comprised of contexts, people, and institutions that will influence development more directly or more indirectly. And this is called the bioecological model of development, where the individual is in the middle with the individual's biology. And then surrounding them, we have wider and wider aspects of the environment. So if we consider that the child is in the middle, the school and the family will be part of the microsystem closer to them. But then there will be other aspects of the environment influencing how the child develops as well, namely the relationship between the family and the school, the family's employment status, the policies of the country, the climate of the country, for example, which would be more at the macro level. And so development can only be truly understood if we look at all the factors that may be exerting an influence on the child's growth. And this is what we mean by looking at development holistically. So this is very much the theoretical background that we stand from. And similarly, and aligned with contemporary understandings of development, contemporary understandings of disability see this as well as the product of continuous interaction between the biology, the social side, and the psychological side of an individual's life. So that means that if we truly want to grasp the experience of disability of a child, we really need to have a good understanding of all these issues. This is what we call the biopsychosocial model of disability, which is the prevailing model today, aligned with the WHO definition. And this is why we need to work with practitioners from other areas, from other disciplines. We need to share expertise in order to gauge this holistic experience of development and disability. And now I will let my colleague Alicia to talk a little bit about the context.
Okay, so why the need for collaboration in early childhood intervention in South Africa? And so what I'm going to do is to just give you the big picture of what we see as the situation of children in South Africa versus the number of intervention personnel that we actually have in our country. That's not the only reason for collaboration, but it's one of the biggest issues in South Africa. The other aspect of why collaboration is important is because children are not just composed of one developmental domain, for example. There are many developmental domains that when a child has a disability, many different types of practitioners are involved. But this is just one aspect that I think really brings home exactly what the problems are. Okay. Can I change the slide? Okay. So if we look at the situation of children in South Africa, we have a million children being born every year in this country, and 6 million of them are under the age of 5. And if we look at the socioeconomic status of these children, about 4 million of these children live in poverty. So what does that actually mean? That actually means that at least when we're saying that they live below the poverty line, and the poverty line is about 580 to 600 Rand. So this means that households in which these children live do not have enough money to meet children's basic nutritional needs. And then we see that this actually then, if we look at child malnutrition statistics in South Africa, we can see that stunting, wasting, and underweight, as well as overweight children are as a result of this poverty. And so South Africa has a major malnutrition problem, and we saw that this was also exacerbated during the COVID-19 pandemic. So if we think about children being malnourished, they don't have sufficient nutrition for learning, and therefore their development will be affected. So not as a result of any disability that they were born with, but just because they're not getting enough nutrition. Next one, Shoshana. If we look at the situation of children with disabilities in South Africa, the problem is we don't have very good, accurate statistics of just how many children with disabilities there are, because South Africa, the way that we collect data is not using measures based on the UNCRPD, and we're not using a biopsychosocial concept of disability, which Susanna just explained. So, you know, we really don't have very good statistics. But if we look at the Southern African data in terms of children with disability, we can see that children under 4, from 0 to 4, are about 5.2% in the Eastern and Southern African region. But these, just to illustrate this data does not include South Africa. But if we want to get a good idea of disability in our region, then maybe we should look to other countries in the region to see where their disability statistics are. And these countries do use the measures which I talked about before. So children 5 to 17, we see as age increases, disability status also increases, so going to about 12.8%. So, you know, these are the sorts of statistics that we see in terms of that we can maybe surmise that we are having in South Africa as well. Next one. If we look at early childhood care and education, we know that children's access to early childhood care and education has increased over, these are all children in South Africa, over the past few years. And if you look at the blue compared to the purple, in terms of maybe in a more than a 15-year period, we can see that really access is improving. However, hidden in this data is that we don't actually know how many children with disability are accessing early childhood care and education, because that measures are not being done either. So we really don't know. However, we do know from some literature that in terms of formal education, grade 1, etc., that at least 70% of children with disabilities are not accessing grade 1. So if we can think about that in relation to early childhood care and education, the numbers are probably similar, if not worse. Okay. And then we go back to the little picture. So we can see that there are quite a number of children requiring intervention in the South African context. And we look at the little picture in terms of the number of rehab professionals in South Africa. This data is taken from the South African Health Review and the HPCSA data as well of 2019. It's probably still similar. We see that, you know, we don't actually have that many healthcare practitioners if we're looking at occupational therapy, physiotherapy, speech therapy, and audio. And you can find those statistics for your own profession if they're not indicated here. But what we find is that the public healthcare sector delivers services to 80% of our population of 60 million people, but less than 20% of the healthcare personnel are in the public healthcare sector. The other 80% are in the private healthcare sector. So really, if you think about that ratio, you know, it is really dire in terms of what children would even be lucky to actually have a rehabilitation or access to rehabilitation. And we need to also remember that all of these people registered with our Health Professions Council don't also necessarily work with a child population, and they might not also be in the country as well, but still be registered. So we have a great picture of children requiring intervention, but very few resources in terms of personnel. The other problem that we have, if we look at the way healthcare practitioners have been trained in this country is very much in a medical model and in a siloed approach in terms of really working within a multidisciplinary way of working. So each therapist, each discipline working in a silo, working with a child individually, and that also is an issue which impacts on the quality of our service delivery when everyone is doing their own thing and not actually even talking to each other in many cases, which is to the detriment of children. So in a nutshell, you know, we need a better way of working, that to use our resources, even though they are limited, they are the most, in Africa, we would say that we're actually the most privileged country in terms of our healthcare resources that we have. Other countries, and there are people on this webinar who are from other countries on the continent who don't have even the personnel that we have, and things are much more dire. So, you know, we need to think of a different way of working, and this was the essence of what this project was about. Thank you.
Thank you, Alicia. So it follows quite clearly then that collaboration is important in this context. But how can we collaborate effectively? Three forms of collaboration have been recognized in the scientific literature on early childhood intervention and early childhood education. And it's really important to try and understand how the different forms, how different they can be in practice. So we have multidisciplinary teamwork. And this is a model where practitioners work independently from each other in the assessment of a child's development. They stay well within the boundaries of their field of knowledge, their discipline. And it tends to be very medical model based. So there's no communication between the professionals from different fields, and often they are not even aware of the work that the other professional is doing with a child. So this is the multidisciplinary way of working. Then we have the interdisciplinary way of working, where professionals from different disciplines work together to achieve a coordinated and coherent whole, although contributions from different professionals are still identifiable in the final outcomes. So the speech therapist and the occupational therapist might have discipline-specific therapeutic goals that are different from each other, but they are shared. And so there is an awareness of the work that is happening in the other fields as well. And then we have the transdisciplinary model, where professionals collaborate from the beginning to develop a holistic and fully integrated narrative about the child, and an all-inclusive intervention plan, which is jointly developed and based on the child's needs rather than on the professional's expertise. This implies that there is a little bit of role release between professionals, and the boundaries of each discipline are crossed. So myself as a psychologist will release a little bit of my expertise onto, for example, the early childhood practitioner or the speech therapist to work with a child, for example, on an issue related to social and emotional development. This is just an example. And we work together with joint goals from the beginning. This results in a much more holistic view of the child, which is thought to allow for more effective problem solving. Now, I'd like to launch a little poll just to have a sense of how I think the poll has already started. Yes, it has started, to have a sense of what models of collaborations you think you work with most of the time. So let's see the kind of responses we get. Oh, this is really interesting. So very little transdisciplinarity so far. %70 of you have responded. So please have a go. So clearly, the majority of participants in this research seminar feel that they are working within a multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary model. A slight majority for multidisciplinary, and very, very little, only 12% transdisciplinary. Okay, this is really interesting. Thank you for your contribution. I think this reflects some of the results that we will present to you afterwards. So I will just close this for now. Thank you. And so in terms of what model is the best, early intervention literature strongly advocates for transdisciplinary approaches as the best practice model for interprofessional teamwork. And it's clear as well about the benefits of that model for families and for teams. However, it's also recognized that the managerial and team resources required to successfully implement this transdisciplinary model may be high, but the potential payoffs for children, families, and therapists' development of expertise is considerable, and it has been shown in the literature over and over again. Many intervention programs adopt some form of transdisciplinary practice, and it is considered to reduce fragmentation of services. You know, that fragmentation that Alicia was mentioning, that professionals working in silos, not communicating, the likelihood of conflicting and confusing reports, which often happens if you're working in a multidisciplinary way and you're not aware of the goals, the therapeutic goals of other professionals. It may be that you're actually being counterproductive. It may actually be that the goals from different disciplines are conflicting with each other. It will reduce issues with communication with families and enhance service coordination. And again, this has been shown over and over again. In a recent editorial by The Lancet Child and Adolescent Health from 2019, it was said, education and health are integral to human capital development. Given their synergy, the two sectors should forge deeper partnerships to accelerate progress towards the ambitious but not unreachable Sustainable Development Goals. And the period between the first 1,000 days of life and the start of primary school is an important window of opportunity for nurturing care that should not be overlooked. Sustainable investment in the preschool years is the foundation of future population health, prosperity, and social equality, and so it must be prioritized. And so this editorial is clear about the importance of collaboration in early years provision, in fact, saying it's absolutely crucial for targeting a whole range of sustainable development goals, particularly in low and middle income countries and deprived settings. And so our project aimed to make a contribution to this and follows an approach that aims to target several of the Sustainable Development Goals, namely good health and well-being, quality of education, but also as a consequence, decent work and economic growth and reduced inequalities and strong institutions. Going back to our project now that we have the background, these are our overall goals and research questions. So the overall goal of part 1 of the project was to understand how health practitioners, therapists, educators, caregivers, and community members communicate with each other to build a narrative about the child's holistic development, which is individualized and accurate enough to capture both the strengths and the needs of that particular child's developmental profile. In part 2, the goal was to generate culturally sensitive and user-friendly resources to raise awareness on the need to collaborate in early childhood intervention and early childhood development provision. So let's focus now on part 1 for now. And here are the main research questions that we had in part 1. So the main research question was, what are the current practices of interdisciplinary collaboration in place in ECI teams in South Africa? What are the perceived needs and challenges to working cross disciplines in ECI provision that were brought by the COVID-19 outbreak? And what is the nature of the relationship between demographic variables and ECI provision collaboration practices in post-COVID-19 ECI provision? And just a reminder that this project started in 2021, which was very much the peak of the pandemic. And therefore, the issue of COVID-19 was absolutely essential to ask at this stage. And now I will ask Shakila to please continue for the next couple of slides.
Great. Thanks, Susanna. I think an important part of the project as well, between the two parts, was that the first part informed the second part, and we tried to get a synergy between the information we obtained and the kind of resources we developed after that. A very important part of the project also was our advisory committee, and their names are all listed here. Dr. Pam McLaren is actually on this call, so we're very pleased to have you here, Pam, and that you could join us. So this was people that were actually very involved in either early childhood intervention or early childhood development. Many of them have worked on the ground, had a lot of experience, and they were really essential to our guiding the way we thought about processes, problem solving when we hit methodological issues. So it was very helpful, and we're very grateful for the advisory committee and the role that they played in this project. The next slide, please, Susanna. So I think there were some kind of considerations that we had to make in terms of data collection. The first thing was to also consider people's levels of literacy. We obviously had diverse professionals that were going to be surveyed in this particular project, and we needed to consider how could we make some of these adaptations. The survey was done primarily through Qualtrics, and Adele May, who is also on this call, played an important role in terms of making sure we made some of these adaptations by putting in some audio supports, both for the question as well as for some of the options, multiple choice options, etc., just so that we could get a more inclusive and participatory, or include more marginalized groups in our research, that it's not always, people with high levels of literacy or highly, developed in terms of their academic or literacy levels. And then we also had to do an online focus group. As Susanna said, it was during the height of the pandemic, and we wanted to also get a discussion going. And one of the methods we used was a Jamboard, where we kind of could get people to just post different ideas, responses to some of our questions and topics. And then, of course, we had to do quite a few telephonic interviews. They were done primarily in English, but for many people who couldn't do these different, strategies that required internet access, etc., we could actually use alternative ways of getting this data. So we tried to kind of get data from various sources and various persons and perspectives in order to inform the project as a whole. Thanks, Susanna.
Thank you, Shakila. And so to respond to our research questions, as Shakila said, we had a national survey and these group interviews. And the survey itself was comprised of some bespoke questions, of course, especially to gather some demographic data. But we also included the interprofessional and socialization valuing scale, which has been used very much in the health context, but it was adapted so as to apply to both education and health in this particular study. And so the interprofessional socialization and valuing scale includes these components: the self-perceived ability to work with others, value in working with others, and comfort in working with others. And this was all asked in the context of post-COVID-19 onset. And we asked, so each scale contains 8 items measured on a 7-point scale, and we asked participants to rate it retrospectively to observe if there was any change of attitudes before the onset of the pandemic and after the onset of the pandemic. And we also conducted telephone interviews with ECD practitioners. In terms of the participant characteristics that we had in our survey, most of the respondents identified as female, large majority. Majority of speech language therapists, 50%, but also quite a few occupational therapists. We had 12% of teachers and educators, some school principals, audiologists, social workers, dietitians, physiotherapists, clinical psychologists, and play therapists. So quite a diverse sample in terms of disciplinary background. Most with honors degree or master's degree, but there were some with doctorates and some with higher education diplomas and BA, BSc. They were mostly from 2 provinces, Gauteng and KwaZulu-Natal, some from Eastern Cape, Free State, Limpopo, Mpumalanga, so I'm really sorry for my pronunciation, Northwest and Western Cape. Equally distributed in terms of experience working with children birth to 6, from 0 to 5 years experience to over 20 years experience. So again, quite varied in terms of how experienced they are. And most of them worked with children daily, which was important for us to have a sense of how collaboration works in their context. What kind of data analysis did we do? We did some statistical analysis of the survey data, of course, but we also did some inductive thematic content analysis, both for the open questions that we had in the survey and also for the focus groups and interviews that we had with ECD practitioners. Let's now look at some of the results. When we asked ECI professionals who was part of their work with young children, many other professionals from other disciplines were mentioned by the majority of respondents, including the family, the occupational therapist, the speech language therapist, the physio, the early childhood practitioner, and the pediatrician. Others were also mentioned by a minority of respondents. But this is overall quite a good picture that there seem to be other people involved in their daily work. Then we provided some examples of teamwork, and these examples illustrate the models of collaboration that I've presented to you earlier. And what we can see in terms of the results is that only 7% said there is no team collaboration taking place. That's the blue slice. There is no team collaboration at all. The 47% is example 3. Professionals meet to jointly develop an intervention plan, but work independently with a child. This is actually the interdisciplinary way of working. And that's what the majority of respondents said they were working with. Then 25% said each professional works with a child independently without knowledge of each other's goals for the child, and that is 25%. And 21% say that they work aligned with the transdisciplinary model, which is working across disciplines towards a single intervention plan for a child. So I'd like to now launch another poll and ask you, are you surprised by these results? And it is just a yes or no answer, but then perhaps at the end we can have a discussion about this. Okay, so clearly the majority of you are not surprised by these results. And let me highlight that actually I think these results are quite good. You know, the fact that the majority of our respondents seem to be working in a interdisciplinary model of collaboration is quite good. Working in a transdisciplinary way is quite challenging. And it's not something that often we can do all the time. It's something that we should always strive to achieve, but it's not something that we can maintain all the time. And so if the majority feel that they're working at interdisciplinary level, that's actually not that bad. But at the same time, there's quite a large percentage of professionals who don't seem to be working, not even at an interdisciplinary way, and stay within the multidisciplinary model of collaboration, or with no collaboration at all, which is obviously quite concerning. Okay, thank you very much for this, and perhaps we can discuss this further when we finish our presentation. So I'll just close this now. Okay. When we asked what were the priorities for the team at the moment, and that was in 2021, so I just turned up again, apologies. So when we asked this, the majority referred to acquiring team strategy skills on how to adapt to the changing circumstances brought by the pandemic. They also referred to using digital communication for working with families and applying interpersonal skills to team collaboration, although this was referred by only just half of the participants. When we looked at the results of the interprofessional socialization and valuing scale, we did some obviously statistical analysis to compare ratings pre-COVID with post-COVID, and we found no significant differences. So our participants feel that their attitude towards collaboration and their values towards collaboration haven't changed between pre-COVID and post-COVID. And actually, we found that there is a relatively high willingness to collaborate within early childhood intervention professionals currently. And so the highest overall rating was for the item that I believe that it is important to work as a team. So there is a general understanding that that is an important thing. But the lowest rated item was, I feel comfortable being the leader in a team situation, clearly highlighting that in order for transdisciplinarity to truly happen and be achieved, some skills related to leadership and facilitation need to be developed, because one of the key aspects of working in a transdisciplinary model in early childhood intervention is that you have a facilitator who actually enables this role release between participants. Okay, so I will move on to the next one. We then, as we said earlier, wanted to know more about the sources of support that the participants felt they needed for effective early childhood intervention after COVID. And these were the key themes that emerged from the focus groups. More cross-disciplinary cooperation of transdisciplinary nature, and this is quite clear. So there is a general feeling that improvement can be made at this level. But also training and professional development, which is aligned with a transdisciplinary approach. You cannot have a transdisciplinary approach without continuous professional development. Aligned with previous results as well, successful communication and leadership skills, exploring new ways of involving caregivers, thinking outside the box. Hello. Could I ask participants to... Hello? Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you. We hear you, Susanna.
Thank you. I will continue. So I was saying successful communication and leadership skills, exploring new ways of involving caregivers, thinking outside the box and use digital communication to collaborate seems to be very important. And finally, a great appreciation of the whole of the role of other stakeholders. Again, very important. So let's then try and tie all this together. So in sum, from the point of view of those working in early childhood intervention, there is some level of collaboration in place, but there are issues with resources and skill sets, namely communication and leadership facilitation skills, which are key in early childhood intervention. As I said, there needs to be a facilitator that enables the role release. And these skills need developing. Also, digital resources and training on digital work seem to be a priority, but openness to collaboration and recognition of its importance are present. Now, we also had some interviews with early childhood development practitioners, so practitioners more based in education, to obtain their views on collaboration with health professionals. And these are the key themes that we obtained. And so the first theme is characteristics of intersector collaboration. And within that theme, we have three sub-categories. First of all, embedded approaches. Embedded approaches are widely recognized in early childhood intervention as a good practice. And it means that health professionals or other professionals from social care, for example, come to the educational context and embed treatment, embed intervention within the natural everyday life context where the child develops and grows. And these are called embedded approaches or naturalistic approaches. And what our participants said is that sometimes they happen, but often they don't, although they would like them to happen a lot more often. Related to that, the second sub-theme was this idea of a unidirectional view of collaboration with health. So practitioners clearly, especially in the education sector, need to be empowered to seek for the support that they need. And I'll just leave some quotes here. Basically, they reached out to us, the speech therapists, obviously looking for business. I think it's more about the willingness of the practitioners to want to get out of the offices or to actually come and see exactly what the environment that the child is in. And so this clearly shows that there is this one directional view of health needing to come to education, which is a good practice. It's part of the embedded approaches model, but clearly showing that this need to be empowered to actually seek support when support is needed, not just when the professionals seem to be available. And then we have a third sub-theme within the main theme, which is private versus public services. Collaboration happens mostly when paid for privately. And I leave you with another quote. And obviously, with the approval of the parents in that was arranged, it doesn't directly fall under the school in terms of we don't pay for the services. It's obviously, once again, a privately used organization. If the parents paid through the medical aid or privately owned OT, it just happened. So again, the need for professionals in ECD to be empowered to actively, proactively look for these embedded approaches rather than relying on this dichotomy between private and public services. And then we have a second theme, which is skills needed to work with others. And within this theme, a few things were mentioned. So IT skills, many use WhatsApp to communicate and find information online, but also relationships with NGOs, which is crucial to break down information and guidance. According to some participants and respondents in the interviews, this was very helpful to them. It was a way of accessing information in a more user-friendly way, was actually through NGOs. Communicating with parents, it seems to be a very important issue across reports. Relationships with parents seem to be somewhat tense sometimes. And I leave you with another quote. I mean, you can schedule parent meetings, you can schedule them for parents, they're just not involved. And there's a reluctance. You tend to get that 10% that always come in and visit, but that you do need to actually speak to, those that you actually need to speak to, you just don't manage to get through to them. And lastly, they also mentioned user-friendly, reputable information, which is simple in a centralized way to use on an everyday basis. Just before we conclude, I just have one last poll that I would like to launch. And I'd like to hear from you, having heard these results. What are the main challenges in implementing transdisciplinary work? And you can choose two options. So if you have to choose two of those, what are the two ones that you consider are the main challenges? Develop facilitation leadership skills, lack of time, communication with parents, communication with other professionals, lack of resources, financial and physical. Okay, very good. So we have about 75% of you have responded now. Lack of resources, financial and physical, seems to be winning with 58% of you choosing that item, which is very interesting because what some argue is that by adopting a transdisciplinary approach, you can actually make services and resources more sustainable. And so there may be an initial investment, but the payoffs are considerably high. So it will be interesting to discuss that. And then the second one is lack of time, 46%, which again is very interesting as well, because transdisciplinary approaches are supposed to reduce the amount of time you have to spend on working in individual goals and therapeutic objectives, because you do it jointly as a team and you work together jointly as a team. So you allocate different people to different aspects of the therapeutic work. So it is really interesting that in this context, it seems to be an issue. And then we have 40% communication with other professionals, and we have 24% communication with parents, and 27% develop facilitation and leadership skills. Thank you very much for that. We will hopefully discuss this at the end. So I'll just stop this again. Right. So just to conclude the part one of the project. Sorry, just need to. Apologies, just 1 second. Although collaboration is seen as key and an integral part of the work of practitioners working in ECI, it looks like professionals in education or early childhood development practitioners seem to have a slightly different perspective on how this may work in practice. ECD practitioners perceive this as more of a unidirectional partnership, potentially with a power imbalance, where ECI professionals choose to work with them based on parental capital and a more business-oriented approach, not on a consistent best practice commitment. And relationships with parents also seem to need work, and collaboration as a team needs to reflect this. Professional development is clearly very important. for both ECI and ECD practitioners, but with a particular focus on leadership and transdisciplinary approaches. So future research, definitely from our side, will pursue communication and facilitation skills in ECI cross-professional work, but also predictors of transdisciplinary work. What are the things that facilitate transdisciplinary work the most? Looking at, for example, the climate of the organization, leadership types, amongst other potential variables that may influence here. And then the question arises of how can CPD, continuous professional development, target facilitation and leadership skills as well as transdisciplinarity. The literature provides some indications of how we can do this. So some say through policy engagement, community and advocacy projects. And community projects are particularly important, especially those that involve a community of practice approach and co-production. And a community of practice is when a group of people who share a common concern and a set of problems or an interest in a topic, they come together to fulfill both individual and group goals. And this could be as part of a research project, but it could be as part of an organizational project as well. And communities of practice often focus on sharing best practices and creating new knowledge to advance a specific domain of professional practice. And it's necessary that there is interaction on an ongoing basis. It's a very important part of the community of practice framework. Many communities of practice rely on face-to-face meetings as well as web-based collaborative environments to communicate, connect, and conduct community activities. And so training within a community of practice approach would certainly benefit partnerships between ECI and ECD. And co-production has also been mentioned as key to enhance professional development for collaboration. And this is when learning happens with and by all the stakeholders at the same time. So resources are created together and learning happens together. Future projects involving co-production are definitely necessary for including collaboration between ECD and ECI. And now the next part of the project, which follows on nicely from what I was just mentioning about communities of practice, the next part of the project is a small-scale community of practice, involving information design students co-producing with ECI practitioners and researchers to create user-friendly and culturally relevant resources for ECD and ECI professionals to raise awareness on the need to collaborate between disciplines in early childhood education and care. And my colleagues will present on that. But just before that, I'd just like to highlight this model that we have, where in order to achieve this idea of truly collective action and transdisciplinarity, we need to first work on the attitudes, this openness to collaboration, to develop skills. And then once we have those skills, we will start seeing individual action from all. And then from there, we will achieve collective action. So the resources we have developed in the second part of the project are mostly focused on developing this component of attitudinal openness to teamwork and collaboration. And I will now pass on to my colleagues who will talk about the second part of the project.
Hi, we're just going to share our screen quickly.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for that, colleagues. Yeah, as Susanna has explained, the project comprised of two parts, and the second part is where information design came in. And we're based, as I mentioned earlier, my colleague Kyle and I are in the information design division at the School of the Arts at the University of Pretoria. And what we did then was, in light of the project, when we knew that there was a need to create multimedia deliverables for this project to make the return on investigation visible. And what we decided in light of the transdisciplinary nature of ECI practices, we found that it would be really wonderful to implement or to adopt this type of transdisciplinary approach for this part of the project as well. And what we did then was we took the project on as part of a curriculum-related project, which is part of the BA Information Design course here at the university. So for those of you, just to contextualize what information design is, you may have heard the term communication designer, and that's essentially the division that Kyle and myself, we're teaching in. And essentially in today's climate where we're surrounded by a world filled with words and pictures and information overload to a large extent, designers need to play a qualified and strategic role to create the contemporary visual environment, right? And it's there, as you can see highlighted on screen, we believe that it's the designer's responsibility to provide original solutions to some of the mass communication problems faced in communities and in societies today. And a lot of these mass communication problems, where the problem lies, what these problems is that they're very complex or otherwise wicked problems where there are no clear answers. There's many stakeholders involved, and at the heart then of information design and in terms of our pedagogy, we really want to get students to learn how to convey meaningful, powerful, and relevant visual messages to audiences using different media. So for example, screen-based media, print-based media, ambient media, to different people, different groups of people. So there's the need to understand the audience that the student's designing for. Our course is structured as a 4-year degree. And why I'm mentioning this is just to give you perspective that the project was completed by students in the exit level information design module, which means they are 4th and final year students. The cohort were 2022 information design students, and we got them on board for the project. So again, just to give you some background in terms of how our course is pitched and in terms of our teaching ethos, we really believe that design and what we want our students to understand also is that design doesn't only serve a commercial purpose. To some of you, maybe your understanding of design may be branding and advertising, which definitely forms part of information design, but is not the only focus. So we've got this ethos that we try and pitch when teaching our students is to really get them to design with their heads, their hearts, and their hands, so that they can apply their skills across a variety of different problems. And then also over the 4 years, each of the information design modules are scaffolded in a way where we build depth of disciplinary skills and expertise. So what you're seeing on screen is a traditional T-shape. And what we strive for is really trying to educate T-shaped designers so that they have the depth of their disciplinary skill, which is built over the 4 years of study, but then taking those skills and applying it across a breadth of different contexts and situations. So often a project brief, for example, would mean that students need to tackle a problem out of the discipline of or beyond the confines of the design discipline, using their design thinking skills. And again, this just makes visible or supports the idea to get on board our students for this project, to get them on board to tackle making our research findings visible, which was an excellent opportunity for them to really collaborate beyond the confines and the silos of merely one discipline. And in terms of that also, with regard to transdisciplinarity within the context of higher education, it's not something that's limited to design specifically. So I'm sure all of you who are familiar working within an academic setting, you do know that there are imperatives from the universities to move towards more transdisciplinary practice at large. And as you can see with the definition on screen, essentially transdisciplinarity moves beyond just working in silos, right? And it's about engaging directly with the production and the use of knowledge outside of the academy. So what this suggests is actually not seeing or designers not seeing themselves as the sole or lone experts working in isolation, but really working with others and working not just for their end users, but with their end users to be able to create relevant and meaningful solutions. And as my colleague will explain, this really is the highlight and actually the advantage of a project like this to have had all the resources or to be able to have collated this experience for the students. And you'll see the results as they at the end of this presentation. So again, just the project focus then as part of the curriculum related project, the InfoMotions were situated specifically within a South African context. So not only in terms of the educational perspective, but also in terms of the ECI practitioners being based in South Africa. So really where this project sits then is at the intersection of professional design practice, design higher education, and then transdisciplinarity. So the information design project, which focuses on InfoMotions, is actually situated there at the center. In terms of that, we have, as my colleagues have mentioned previously, we do have a website to be able to share these resources, and that's what the interface looks like. But I'm going to hand over to Kyle now to really take you through the InfoMotion project, to give you an overview of the project and specifically to zoom into, mind the pun, but to zoom into the different aspects of collaboration, and he'll make visible how the transdisciplinarity was, or how that informed the final deliverables. Thank you.
Thank you, Fatima. So at the start of the project, what we did was we, myself and my colleague, Alexander Malk, who is a practicing designer, we teamed up, and as the two core lecturers of this part of the project, we acted almost as I will explain, as sort of dam walls. And what I mean by that is the students had to collaborate with several stakeholders, several different kinds of groups of people, which I will explain. But this always needs to be filtered in some way so that there is and that's why I say dam wall, where this information can be collated and students can be, and students sort of direct the information so that it is clear and accessible. Just a little bit about the project kind of scope. This is a 5 to 6 week project that the fourth years do right at the end of their, it's one of their last projects. So what's great about this is it's also a project where the students can bring in information, bring in some of the skills from all four of the years, and apply that, as Fatima mentioned, outside of the academy. So for a different kind of purpose, in this case, ECI and ECD practice. All right. So I'm going to just, as I said, go through the process that the students followed. So right in the beginning, this is always, I would say, the messy part. It's also the fun part of any project. And this is where students had to go through, had to sift through a lot of dense information, a lot of statistics, some of which you have already seen on the from the previous, from part 1. So there's a lot of information that was gathered in that part of the project. But now for part 2, how is it that how are we going to distill that dense information, obviously very important, but in a way that makes it accessible? So there's several steps or several kind of techniques that we take the students through in distilling the core ideas. But actually, what we did here was we gave the students a few workshops on storytelling. Who is a hero? What is a hero? What is a villain? What is the challenge? What is a protagonist? And what kind of journey they need to go on. So I'm sure if you think of some of the Hollywood films that have come out, you can often track that kind of thread that goes through those kinds of or films, and that kind of arc is something that you'll see is employed throughout the videos. As part of distilling the core ideas, the students then also had to interact not only with the information, but with the team that worked on part one. As well as we paired them with ECI master's students, current students at UP, but also some alumni, where they could, where they asked these practitioners, for some relatable, some actual instances where different kinds of collaboration or different kinds of collaboration in a multidisciplinary sense, disciplinary sense, transdisciplinary sense, and then also working with parents. How can you bring, what are some practical examples of bringing parents in to assist children with some early developmental disabilities. This took place on an app or an application called Slack. So we were able to also record all the interactions. All right, then once the students, let's say, became comfortable kind of with the information, understood what it is that they now need to convey, the next step is, how do you convey it? One way, this is not the only way, but is to use metaphors as a way to make something relatable. So when you see it, you're like, oh yes, I know I sort of know the problem. In this case, it was, what are some of the problems that you encounter when you're doing things yourself or DIY? It's, perhaps things go wrong and then you don't have somebody else to fix it. So so what students did was they imagined these situations and they applied or they used those as lenses to filter the information gathered in part one. All right, then the students moved to the conceptualization phase. As you can see on the screen, this is again one of those messy parts of the project. Okay, so we have the information, we have the metaphor that we're going to use, and now we need to figure out, almost frame for frame, we need to figure out, all right, how are we going to say it? All right.
Can I just add
Yes.
something there? I think at that point, it was very important where the students weren't just answering questions posed, but they were challenged to ask the right questions to arrive at meaningful content. Thanks, Guy.
So the first thing that we encourage, so you can have a look there on the left, this is sort of the kind of arc or the storytelling arc that the students had to employ here. But the first step in terms of actually generating the information is script development. And the students were also given workshops on how to create a script. This is not something that they've necessarily done before. And the importance of this is, for the next step, first of all, they need to articulate this metaphor, make sure that they're touching on all the right points, or bringing that in the research through in an accessible way. So this is a iterative process, script writing. Once we had gotten to something of a first draft of a script, of the storytelling script. We also then had Shakila and Susanna and Alicia give some input to make sure that the students interpreted the information correctly. So again, so that information was brought, or that feedback was brought in, and Alex and I then would sit with the students and see, all right, how is it that we're going to apply the feedback that they got. All right, then the students moved to, once their scripts were finalized, they collaborated with Tux FM, which is the University of Pretoria's local radio station, with a voice-over artist. So because there were several groups of students, one of the challenges was that the different groups would inevitably have different kinds of visual styles. So one way that we could thread that all together is to have the same voiceover artist, so that the videos do read as a series. So yes, so this is just one of the TikTok videos that one of our students took. I'm going to see if it does play, just to give you a sort of an idea of what it looks like going into a studio there. So this was also the first time that the students worked with a voiceover artist in a sound booth with scripting, and also directing the voiceover artist. And that was a two-way street. The voiceover artist would often give input of, maybe we should say it in this way, and at other times, intonation, and where can you go, how can you indicate climax with the voice.
I just want to say also, in terms of our projects, what I should have added earlier is often a hypothetical situation or problem is posed to students. So I think what was great about this project and how it brought all these different key players together is that it was a real, like a problem in the real world, and they were addressing that problem in a very real and not in a hypothetical way.
Yeah, and so just to add on what Fatima said there, so although they have we had a sort of a path for them to follow, at several points in the project, there was feedback that was brought in that the students found sometimes challenging. You know, perhaps that wasn't what they had intended to do, but it was actually information that they received, or feedback that they received that made them sort of change course slightly. And this was one of the instances. So, you know, intonation in voice, how to create climax through voice. So I'm just going to play this quickly. Gone as I planned, when you had to bid a tune, said you'd never love anew. I wondered if I could hold it and fall in love with it. All right, so as you could see, the students were on site in the recording studio, changing the script, or changing small parts of the script as they were working with the voiceover artist. I again was there to supervise. I have a background in motion design. And so I was also able there to sort of filter and help the students, or find a way that we could incorporate the feedback. All right, so once the lead track, which is the voiceover, was finalized, the students then move on to a process of storyboarding. So this is essentially scene for scene storyboarding. It's how do, it's a kind of a shorthand for students. Animation is a very time-consuming medium within design, and so we use hand-drawn, very quick hand-drawn sketches, so that we can see and understand what it is that the student intends to do, and we can then very quickly see if something isn't communicating correctly, or if there's repetition, or if it's frankly too boring, the way they want to represent a particular scene. But then they move on to developing a visual style. So this often this is what you will see at the end, but this is really only the end bit, and there's a lot of thinking that has gone into conceptualizing the videos before we get to the kind of skinning or the visual articulation. And these are some of the visual treatments for the video that we are going to show you. All right, we essentially then created a toolkit. This was something that was pre-decided or pre-written by Susanna and her colleagues. That we divided this into 3 categories. And the first category was different kinds of collaboration. Those are the first 4 videos. So the first one gives you an overall of what collaboration should achieve. Then the next one was on multidisciplinary collaboration, where it's useful, but also what the limits of it are. Same with interdisciplinarity, and then finally transdisciplinarity and what the advantage is of going that route. The next 3 videos had to do with communication. How do we communicate between practitioners and also with parents? And specifically 2 kinds of examples would be active listening, and then also joint problem solving in decision-making processes. And then the last category was how to bring families in to help or continue with therapy at home, and not only just continue with therapy, but also having the families provide input to the practitioners. So again, that was a 2-way street. We're not going to show you all the videos. At the end, we will give you a QR code link where you can view all 9. But we are going to share the video here for you on transdisciplinarity.
Just make sure your volume's up so you can.
Yes, please make sure you've put your volume up so that you can hear the voiceover and also the background soundtrack.
Multi and interdisciplinary systems may be ideal collaboration models in environments with abundant practitioners and resources. In South Africa, where childcare practitioners are struggling to meet an often overwhelming demand, a different system is needed. According to a demographic study in 2018, there were 5,180 registered occupational therapists. This leaves 0.9 qualified OTs per 10,000 South African citizens if everyone needs therapy. It would take one therapist 416 days working around the clock to be able to have a single session with all their patients. The situation is dire, but not doomed. We can look into a transdisciplinary system of collaboration where the expertise of 4 funnels into 1. In nature, the system functions similar to a dam. Dams are barriers constructed to hold back water, raising its levels to form a reservoir. It stops the flow of multiple streams that run from different sources. Coming together, they pour themselves into this gateway shared by creatures. Mixing together, their waters merge into a single substance. The dam wall acts as a barrier that hugs the body of water. It determines when and what quantity of water is released at a single time into a young river below. This barrier is the key practitioner, the corner piece, who functions as the touch point between their young patients, educators, family, and other therapists. Take Alison, for example. She's a psychologist who works up to 60 hours a week. She has recently started working with Pumi, who has Down syndrome. She realized that her field alone would not cover the variety of challenges Pumi is facing. A transdisciplinary approach needed to be used, and the expertise of a speech therapist, audiologist, and occupational therapist was called in. Implementing this new approach, they collaborated on a group strategy that she could execute in her sessions with Pumi. For example, Alison consulted the OT about assistive devices, how to use household items in play, and how to encourage participation in Kumi's everyday routines. 80% of children in South Africa are reliant on public health care, but only 20% of all healthcare workers practice in the public sector. The only way to meet the demand is through distribution of resources. Having learned from nature, we see now that multiple waterfalls and intertwining streams form efficient water networks. But these systems are only stepping stones to the bigger picture. Transdisciplinary dams pull together the waters of collaboration into a single body of knowledge. The success of this relies on the key practitioner controlling the dam's gates. This person regulates the current into a single river, a child.
All right, so as you can see in that video, or I hope you can see a lot of the thinking that I've run through and how that was applied, but you can see that they used the metaphor of a specific kind of water mechanism, streams of knowledge that are then filtered through a dam. It's essentially a very simplistic way of putting the dam wall, being the key practitioner. And this speaks to some of the problems actually that Susanna, when Susanna posted the one poll of what are some of the biggest challenges, and the two that came out on top was the lack of time and the lack of resources. And this transdisciplinarity or transdisciplinary approach to collaboration. It helps reduce the amount of resources needed to treat a young child. So what I was saying is I hope that you can see a lot of the thinking that went into this. So we have the metaphors. The core problem here is how do we communicate what transdisciplinarity is? And they use the metaphor of the water mechanism, but then also how in talking to the ECI students and alumni, they were able to use a practical example, in this case of Tumi, to explain how a transdisciplinary approach was used to treat that young child. Sorry about that.
Great. So as Kyle mentioned, all the videos are available on the Early Childhood website that we've put together. So there are different resources. The videos will act as a toolkit of sorts. And just going back to my very first slide on information design, right, and what the aims and objectives are, I hope the video has also shown how a design deliverable can make research findings accessible for this specific target audience in ways that are not only engaging, but interesting. What we found is, or in terms of, we've also put the videos up on our information design YouTube page, and the number of views has been very insightful. So we're really hoping that not only are people learning from these videos, but also enjoying them to want to continue watching them
and share them.
And sharing them ultimately. So in light of that, we've also made available other supporting outputs, such as this quick guide, which was collated from the information that we've gleaned, and the model to promote collaboration, which Susanna said starts with a change in attitude, for example, as you can see on screen, has been put together for people as a quick guide. It's a PDF document, which can also be downloaded from our website. It hasn't been uploaded yet, but it will be shortly. So again, just to show you how these design deliverables are really providing a return on investigation in ways that are more accessible than, say, for example, your typical journal articles or conferences and seminars. So just to conclude then, as we promised, we've provided a QR code for you here to be able to access the website. I'm not going to read the acknowledgements, but again, it's just the acknowledgement speaks to this collaborative and transdisciplinary process, not only of content generation, but in the design of the videos. And yeah, we'd like to really thank you for your time. And we can open the floor to any questions if there are any.
Also, just before we get to that, for those who don't know, you can just open your camera app and position it over the QR code. It will immediately let you open it in a browser. And I think we've seen, I'm not sure if it is the website that's slow today or if it's just our internet, but give it a few seconds or a minute or so to load. And I will, if it hasn't already, I'll check. I'll also provide a link to it in the chat.
And yes, again, because of working together and for the common good, we really hope that you pass this website on and that you find the resources really valuable, both in the way that you think about your ECI interventions, but then also in your practice. Thank you.
Thank you, Kyle and Fatima, for your presentation. And we've got some interesting questions on the chat. I will pick up on the last one if I can, and then I'll just ask people to perhaps ask their questions verbally so we can have some discussion as well. So I'm surely I'm not the best person to answer any questions that are related particularly with the South African context, but one of the advantages of transdisciplinary work when it's correctly implemented is that transition between contexts, but also turnover of professionals in the same service is facilitated, because if you have joint goals that are properly documented and accessible to all members of the team members can change and they will always work towards the same goals. I know it's a very different context, but in the context of the UK, we suggest, for example, having smart schedules in the classrooms, and those smart schedules have the goals distributed across a timetable for that week. And the goals are goals that were developed jointly by the transdisciplinary team. And so if someone changes, and they often do, as we also have that problem, especially in early childhood education, everyone who comes in can just very quickly look at the smart schedule, and they know what are the main goals for that child at that particular time. I don't know if my colleagues want to pick up on any of the questions that have been asked, or if somebody wants to raise a different question at this point.
I'll just add to Sue's query there, Sue Philpott, in the chat, talking about that most of our therapists are community service therapists, and actually half of, if you look at the cohort of therapists, if we have about 5,000 occupational therapists working registered, then about 2,500 are community services in addition to that. So yes, I do agree with you that a lot of our in public health, we do have a lot of therapists who are maybe not skilled in relationship-based work, which is required of a transdisciplinary team. However, what we are seeing more and more at an undergraduate level in terms of training, we're starting to see more integrated therapy in terms of training, and also at a graduate level, we do our master's program in ECI, which tries to also give practitioners the skills. So that program's been running for the past 20 odd years now. And we hope that the graduates from these programs will also go back into their ecologies and train and do continuing professional development for the people and become leaders, actually, because obviously training people in this way cannot just be at the level or at the university. So, we're hoping that our cohort of students trained within a more collaborative way can go out and change. But yes, so I agree with you that, relationship-based work is required, and we don't have that sustained number of therapists working in the public healthcare sector, and we lose a lot of therapists as well, to overseas as well as to the private sector. So it is a challenge. That 80-20 ratio is really a challenge for us in terms of where our resources are. And the only change we're going to see is there is going to be more investment in the public healthcare sector with more posts, and so that people can remain there. But we do see people, working in the public healthcare sector, are people that who have been there for many years, are the ones and the champions, and we know of some of them as well. And, just understanding what keeps them there, beyond just lack of resources or the challenges of working in a context with lack of resources.
Can I add something as well, Susanna? And then I'll pass on to Shakila. Again, my background and context is design, right? But just in light of that model of collaboration, where the first step is awareness. And I think this really speaks to Alicia's point in terms of how students are trained. So notwithstanding the operational and sometimes even strategic challenges that we face in a public context in South Africa, I think what this project spoke to or just highlighted for us was this idea of if you can change someone's mindset and create awareness around it, even if the support systems or structures are not there, just letting sort of that light, like our students, for example, have that light bulb moment, to show that what may be possible. Like we really hope that, for example, these resources can also instill in people on an individual level, because ultimately that awareness needs to sort of happen at an individual level before it can even become collaborative. So we're really hoping that, a combination of practice and education and sort of like a praxis mindset can actually get people working towards collaboration.
I agree. And I think just following on Alicia's response to Sue, I think the idea was also to create resources that people can use over and over for their own training purpose, etc. Because I think one of the things that came out of our discussions in the first phase of the study was the need for resources to make practitioners' work a little bit easier and to kind of, guide that process in a way. So I think, that's also a way of addressing some of these high turnovers and people not being involved for long term at a place, is to kind of have a consensus in terms of how we work. And perhaps some of these resources can, serve in that way. I see, Alicia, we also had a question, and Susanna, right at the beginning. I don't know if it was from Claire.
Yeah, Claire was. Yeah, Claire mentioned the high number of people working in a transdisciplinary way and that surprising result. And I think, Claire, if we think about the COVID-19 pandemic, it really required people to do a lot of task shifting, and task shifting is just a different word for role release in a way. And if you think about people in hospitals, they were doing vaccinations, they were doing therapists were doing vaccination counseling, or even vaccinations, I think, at that point. And so I think the idea of role release actually became something much more real for people. And because we always see in our training that, people are very hesitant to go in a transdisciplinary way. They're very hesitant to release their skills to another practitioner, although they're quite happy to release some skills to a family member. But because of, competition between disciplines, we see that people are reluctant to release their skills to a fellow professional. So, I think, the COVID-19 pandemic was what we would call a bifurcation point in terms of it just highlighted to people that collaboration is important. And whereas I think also a lot of people, that 21% maybe weren't totally transdisciplinary, but were maybe using a lot of components of transdisciplinary work, and realized that when the patients weren't coming to the hospital because they couldn't, they need to find different ways of actually getting to patients. And that was one of the key issues that we found as well, that people, that intervention stopped when people stopped coming to hospitals. And that also just tells us we need a different form of intervention that is not reliant on a place of service, but can be embedded into everyday activities of children, which Susanna highlighted about embeddedness. I see Claire's hand is up as well. I don't know if you want to unmute yourself, Claire.
Hi, thank you, Alicia. I'm not sure if you can hear me.
Then yes.
I have a very bad cold, so excuse my voice as well. I was just interested if the data could extrapolate for us who reported that they were working transdisciplinary, because from my experience, it seems only possible in the right type of system, like a specialist unit, pediatric unit, working from Barrow or Red Cross and so on. I'm in the Department of Education in the Eastern Cape, and we still haven't, even in our district-based support teams, managed to work in a transdisciplinary way. And I agree with what some of the research showed up. There's this them and us. We come as therapists with this high level of knowledge, and then we treat our ECD practitioners or our educators as though they really know nothing, rather than getting to a point where there's some shared understanding about the child, without it being, termed in language that just is overwhelming for the educator. So just wanted to make those 2 points.
Thank you. These are really interesting points, and I wanted to highlight 2 things. Well, the first thing is actually the vast majority of people, both in our results but also here in the poll today, mentioned that they were working at interdisciplinary level, which is already quite good. And so if you're working at that level, often if you do the right switches and with the sort of encouragement of a pandemic, you find yourself working in transdisciplinary ways sometimes. But also I think the next step for us in terms of research is perhaps to really look how people are looking in practice. I think there may have been, and there is often, a misunderstanding of what transdisciplinarity really entails. And I think perhaps some of those people who said that they are working in transdisciplinary ways, they are perhaps more often within an interdisciplinary model, but that is something that would have to be confirmed through in-depth observations and, as we said, a community of practice in engagement with practitioners in the field to truly address that. Thank you for your contributions. Are there any other questions? We still have a few minutes left, so it would be great if we could open up the discussion to everyone. It was interesting in the poll that most of participants weren't surprised with the results. I was surprised with the results. I wasn't thinking that so many people were going to say that they were working in an interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary way. So I thought that was actually quite good. But that didn't seem to be the view of the participants in this call. So perhaps someone would like to comment on that, or any other comments. We have a hand raised, Poonam. Would you like to unmute yourself?
Hi, can you hear me, Susanna?
Yes.
Hi, thank you so much. So yeah, I'd just like to contribute or make a comment. So I've been in the ECD sector for over 30 years. And I truly feel that from the different roles that I have been through this journey, I feel that your findings were a little surprising, because I do feel that we are still in the sort of multidisciplinary situation, because I feel the practitioners and the therapists are really not collaborating. So what I would like to ask is your research. You said you did this through the COVID pandemic, and collaboration was at its highest, if I can say that. Would there be some sort of a support research or an additional research to see from then to now, where have we reached thus far? Because the collaboration aspect I would be very keen to understand, is it still as severe as it was in that time, or has it changed to some degree? Because I do feel that there's still so much that we need to do in terms of practitioners and therapists and the professional collaborating. The last NGO that I worked with, we actually went out to support ECD centers. We worked in deep rural areas, and we worked with the ECD centers very closely, where we even encouraged them to come for the monthly therapist visit to the local clinics, and bring in some of the children who they felt needed to, have some sort of a test or intervention done. So I also feel that a second point would be that NGOs need to be quite a big focus in this research, because I think they can be of great help to providing some sort of support. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for your contribution. Those are great points. And yes, I would very much like to continue the research. And as I said, to look at how things are working in practice and how they're working in practice now. It is true that for some people and for some services, the changes that the pandemic brought were quite eye-opening, and much of the collaboration work that was implemented then continued. But it is also true that for some services, things just went back to exactly what they were before. In any case, I was still very surprised that there were so few people saying that throughout the peak of the pandemic, only 7% said that there was no collaboration at all happening. I mean, comparing to, for example, here, the UK, most services for young children with special needs and disabilities completely stopped. So there was no form of collaboration whatsoever, not even near that. So I was quite surprised to see that actually, in times of great need, there seems to be this willingness, at least in our sample, to come together and do the work. And so I thought that was a very positive result. But yes, in the next stages of the research, pending funding and availability of resources, we will definitely look at how things are working in practice at the moment. Thank you for that. Don't know if my colleagues want to add anything to that.
If I could just add to Poonam's
Sure.
comment, Susanna, I think if you look at the results, Poonam, it's about perception, right? The therapists think they are working collaboratively, but the ECD practitioners don't think the practitioners are working collaboratively. So it comes down to the fact that, who's giving you the information as well. And that's why it was important for us to go in and do qualitative work with ECD practitioners as well, because our cohort of ECD practitioners was less than the therapists, but we wanted to understand, get a much more in-depth perspective from them. So while therapists may have been maybe working more collaboratively in a hospital setting, they probably did not work collaboratively across sectors as well, which then speaks to your experiences in the ECD sector. So I think we need to look at that data, and when we write it up, understand that, just looking at results on the face value doesn't tell you what is actually happening underneath it. And that's why research like this is important, to combine different methods of not just quantitative methods, but to go in qualitatively and just pick up those perspectives that might differ, and tell us why we're seeing or we're not seeing certain things.
And this is why as well it's so important to start with this issue of raising awareness, because clearly I think there are some, even though we provided examples, very concrete examples of the different ways of collaborating, clearly there are different understandings of what it means to work in transdisciplinary work. So we think the first step is to raise awareness and to make people think and question themselves. Are we really working in a transdisciplinary way, or can we do better? And what are the skills that we need to improve to make it actually work? Great, thank you. Do we have any other questions?
Susanna, there was a question with regard to language, but we have responded in the chat. There was a query about making these videos accessible, or how would they be accessible when we have such a diversity of official languages. And we did mention in the chat that the the videos, the copy is being translated into some other South African languages, and the videos will have these closed captions. So we're hoping in that way, the reach will be even wider within a local context.
Thank you for that, Fatima. I missed that question. Apologies.
And Susanna, I think also the point wasn't only about the videos, but also to say one of the challenges are the language barriers between professionals and families, and that might also impact on the way people collaborate. And I think while some places might have access to translators, that's not always the case. And I just want to agree with Sue that that does remain a challenge. If I may also just say something on, I think it was Poonam, and I think also one of the other comments in here. Yes, I know that there are inconsistencies in terms of what we reported and what people are reporting occurred in different provinces, etc. We did kind of give a background in terms of where the participants came from. And of course, we know that, in cities or in Gauteng, for example, access to resources may be a little bit different. And the way people work may be a bit different. So to also just understand it's very much situated in a certain context with the particular participants that we had approached. So it will vary from place to place. But what I think we did see that was rather unique was people's willingness to find alternative ways of working with the families. So it might not have been still, people coming into hospitals, etc. But like we said, using online platforms to support families, WhatsApp groups, videos. So there were very creative ways that people had found to continue working with families and in different ways. So I think, that's probably what we started to capture in the research as well.
Thank you, Shakila. And certainly for future research, another important line of research would also be the work with parents through communities of practice and supporting parents to integrate transdisciplinary teams as it should be according to the good practice in early childhood intervention. Any other questions or comments? Okay, brilliant. Thank you all so much for coming to our presentation. I hope you have enjoyed it. Please make use of our resources. Go look at them online. There's more videos as wonderful as the one that you just watched. And and just get in touch with us if you want to hear more about the research and about the resources that we're developing. Thank you so much. Thank you all. Have a good evening.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I think you can stop the recording, Susanna.